Jim Coyle with you, as is Dustin Shooty, joined now by Kevin Sweeney from College Basketball Central. Kevin, how are you, sir?
Good, guys. Appreciate you having me on.
Oh, I love having you. Appreciate you joining us. It's been kind of slowed down a little bit after the initial just rush to the portal and some guys going here and there. And then it's just it was a rather slow week.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to settle into a pattern here for the next couple of weeks where Monday and Tuesday you get a lot of commitments because the kids take their visits, over the weekend, see the campus. Schools, quite frankly, put the pressure on and say you got to decide, and they announce Monday or Tuesday. But then I think the rush into the portal will have absolutely slowed down. The question is, will we still get a trickle of big names as we get closer to the deadline? We got that last year. We kind of got a second wave the final week, which was, I believe, the last week of April. This year it goes until May 11th. So I don't know if that if we'll still be in late April because that's near the draft deadline. Will it be towards the early to mid May? I don't know exactly, but I don't think we're done. I don't think the group of names in the portal today is the group of names we're stuck with. I think there's more to come and potentially some big ones.
Yeah, for Indiana, that has not been. They've added a couple of good, obviously, additions to their front court needs. Peyton Sparks, of course, and Khalil Ware. But the positions that they're waiting to fill, those wings, the shooters, that's where they are now. And whether that's going to be Chris Ledlum, who's been on a visit to Tennessee, or Connect, or Necht, rather, how you say it. And those are the type of guys that Indiana fans are waiting to hear about. But it's a process. And Mike Woodson did have knee surgery last week, so that kind of put things on a hold for a little bit.
Yeah, that doesn't help matters, right? Like, obviously,
no. Bad timing for that.
Yeah, I mean, this is a rush. I mean, obviously, Indiana has enough to sell where, I don't think many kids are going to turn down talking to Indiana because they have to wait a week to go to campus because of Mike Woodson's knee surgery. But I do think, obviously, you want to hear on those guys, because if you know you're not getting them, you can move on to other targets. There are other guys out there who can help them, but they've been in it deep for a while now with guys like Ledlum, and I know he had dinner with Rick Pitino in St. John's yesterday. So it seems like a market is formed for him, and we'll see what he decides. And if he goes elsewhere, then Indiana will have to look elsewhere. But I think he would help. I mean, he's a big physical guy who can make a shot, who can get downhill, who can play multiple positions. You can never have enough of those guys.
And I know you talking that there's no reason for anyone to be any kind of a panic. What Indiana needs, and obviously besides the people we're talking about, what is out there for them right now to look at to fill these needs, besides whether it's Necht or the ones that we've been speaking of. Ledlum, Ellis from Louisville kind of entered the picture. What's the kid from Matthew Cleveland from Florida State, maybe another one.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of kids who are going through the process a little bit slower. There's also a lot of kids who are kind of seeing where the draft goes first and then focusing on the portal. Like, for instance, Hakeem Hart from Maryland's a guy that Big Ten fans' names is a name that Big Ten fans will know. He's a kind of plug-and-play wing starter. He's in the NBA draft and in the portal. I would assume he comes back to college at some point, but there's been very little said about his recruitment. So he'd be a guy who you could maybe work down the list to if that happens. There are some other names, like Cormac Ryan at Notre Dame is a guy who can just flat out shoot the basketball and is solid. He'd be a guy who you could plug in if you missed on a wing target or two. Seamus Lukosius is a pretty similar player to Necht from Butler, another guy whose recruitment has just not been very, very public. So that could mean he's not quite as far down the line in the process. All those guys would be good. And then there's guys you can work down through, with some of the mid-major names that are really, really talented, and go from there. So I think what Indiana's done is smart. And I think to be clear, there are always more contacts and connections out there than what is being publicized, because oftentimes there are a lot of kind of cursory calls and back channels and things like that. So I would anticipate that Indiana is relatively prepared, regardless of what happens with a guy like Chris Ledlum, to make a quick move to the next target.
How important is it for Mike Woodson for this class, whatever you want to call it? I don't know if you call them classes anymore, just because of the mixture. It's all this cycle. Better for a better word, I guess. They've got to hit the home runs of the pieces they need now. It's not a wait till next year kind of a thing. They need those pieces now if they're going to be competitive at the level they want to be competitive.
Yeah, and I think one that's kind of true to an extent everywhere now, right? Like I think with the portal, there's less runway, there's less excuses for rebuilding years. Indiana has a lot to sell, and they should expect that they're able to win every year. And I think when you make this splash, like getting Khalil Ware, who's one of the best transfers on the board, one of the most talented kids in the portal, certainly, you also kind of change your timeline a little bit, where this is no longer, oh, well, we're losing Trace and we're losing these guys, so maybe this is this is a rebuild year. No, not. It wasn't before, and it certainly wasn't after you land one of the best bigs in the portal. So it's time to add those last couple of pieces. They don't have to be huge scorers, but they have to be really good high-level contributors to help this team stay near the top of the Big Ten.
Is there, and this isn't just an Indiana thing, but among college basketball, with the lack of patience, I guess you could say, it's not like we had a bunch of patience before the transfer portal and all this stuff. But now I'm curious, do coaches feel more pressure to go out and get high-level talent or make pitches to transfer portal guys, even though maybe they don't fit their system, as opposed to recruiting? Because as you mentioned, there's, especially in some of these high-level programs, there's not a lot of patience anymore for rebuild. It's, you got to go out and get this guy so we can win immediately. And there seems to be less excuses for not winning immediately. I mean, there are some guys in this realm that continue to go by, we might add a guy or two from the portal, but a majority of what we're doing is through recruiting. But I feel like if you get into that intermediate area where you got to win now, it's portal or bust, as opposed to trying to build your team through high school recruiting.
I think the best way to put it is that, there's a lot of guys out there, freshmen and sophomores, who've shown a little bit of promise that a while back you would have just bet on. You would have said, hey, look, like, we recruited this guy for a reason. We really like his game. Like, we want to invest time in him and make him a really good player. And now that's seen as a hole that has to get filled. And some coaches are confident enough in who they are to say, look, like, I trust my eyes. I trust this kid. We're going to make it work. But that takes a little bit more job security than it used to. And I think it also takes a rare level of confidence in yourself. I think a lot of coaches kind of measure themselves probably too much, quite frankly, compared to what everybody else is doing. And I think a lot of coaches see, oh, well, they're not relying on, X guy who averaged 3 points a game last year. Why should we? And so I think that's led to, and I think what's really interesting about that is, obviously, like, every coach now wants to fill every hole they have with the portal. That's going to get a lot more difficult in 2 years once the COVID year's over, because there's a lot of plug and play starters, right? 23 and 24-year-olds who are out there right now, whether they're mid-major guys, whether they're, guys like Hakeem Hart, who I just mentioned, who are just 4-year starters who are like, whatever, I'll do one more year somewhere else. Once those kids go away, there's going to be a lot of holes that people have been used to filling with the portal that aren't going to be able to be filled anymore. And I think that's really an interesting storyline long-term in college basketball.
And going forward, you look at the draft, the top 20 picks in the draft are freshmen or the equivalent. So obviously the elite talent, they're all freshmen. But if you look at the teams that were in the Final Four this year, I don't think that, obviously, there are no one from those teams are in the top 20 of the draft. So there's a difference between having the elite of the elite, but yet having the best team you can have in college basketball. It's a balance of sorts.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that doesn't mean you shouldn't recruit top end freshmen and NBA prospects, but I think you have to be smart about them, and you have to think about, like, are we are we losing our system and our identity? Do we have to build our entire team around this kid? And if we do, it's probably not the best decision to try to win in March. I think if you can get a guy, right, I think almost all top 20 freshman bigs, like guys who could go in the top tier of the NBA draft who is a freshman big, that's never a good take in my opinion. Almost never a good take if you want to actually win in March, because you're just not going to like the history's there. I mean, Shaka at Texas is actually a great example. They took one every year and it never worked because those guys are so raw. You have to do so much around them to make them successful. To me, like I want older bigs. I'm okay with taking a younger guard, especially a guy who can score. But I think I would, if I was a coach, I'd really be picking my spots. I know it sounds like a real luxury to say, oh yeah, like I don't really want the guy who's going to go like 23rd in the draft. Like that's a ridiculous statement. But I do think you have to pick your spots of like, hey, we don't necessarily need this, even if it's going to help us win the offseason. It's not going to help us win in March.
I think to me, that's probably one of the hardest disconnects or biggest gaps maybe between fans and coaches is that every fan wants every 5-star prospect. They want the best guy at every position, right? But when a coach is evaluating talent, they've got to find somebody that's going to fit their system or do what they want to do. Because I think Illinois is a great example of this. I mean, Sky Clark was one of the most heralded players, coming out of high school. Illinois lands him, and you think immediately, okay, this is a Big Ten championship level team. This is a Final Four contender. And it didn't work. And I'm not saying, I mean, Illinois looked better once he left. And I'm not saying that's his fault. I'm not saying that's Brad Underwood's fault. But sometimes those things just don't connect. And we've seen examples of that, throughout college basketball. It's just, that to me is always interesting. It's not necessarily it's not based on the star that you get. It's based on who fits into your system. And I think that's still, even in today's era, still a big disconnect between fans and coaches.
Yeah, it's system fit. And it's also, it's evaluating talent, right? And this is no knock on fans who obviously will watch film or whatever and make their opinions, but like they're not professional talent evaluators. And quite frankly, the professional talent evaluators giving Sky Clark his 5th star were probably wrong. Like Sky Clark is not very good right now. He might get there and he's talented, but like Jaden Epps was by far a better basketball player this past season than Sky Clark. And quite frankly, if you watch Jaden Epps in the recruiting circuit, I don't understand how the people who are paid to do recruiting rankings said that Jaden Epps was not better than Sky Clark, right? Like that's just, but that's the reality. I think at the end of the day, so much now is, like there's so much focus on all the other stuff about being a head coach. Oh, how are you going to recruit? How are you going to do NIL? How are you going to do this? How are you going to do that? Like the most important thing still in building a great college basketball team is being an elite talent evaluator and a very good talent developer. If you do those two things well, you're going to win games. You're going to go to the NCAA tournament. You're going to have success in that venue. And I think a lot of guys have gotten away from that because they don't have to anymore, because the portal's right there for them. It's whatever. Like we can just take, especially at a great job, right? If you have a really good program, you have NIL money behind you. All right, I'll just take my pick of the litter. These guys average 16 points a game here. You average 10 points a game here. Boom, boom, boom. We're done. Right? Like that. I don't know how sustainable that's going to be. I think at the end of the day, the guys who really know how to evaluate are going to be the guys that win long term in this. Whether they have one bad year because they're young when everyone else is old, that's fine. But I still think that the same stuff is going to matter long term.
And the balance of hitting the portal, blending the new players with the current roster guys, specifically guys like Caleb Banks, CJ Gunn, who come as freshmen, who are true freshmen, who are going to need to develop. They're looked at as guaranteed 3-year guys, probably. That's without them transferring somewhere. But they're minimum 3 to 4 year guys, probably, which is not the norm anymore in college basketball. And every year, your team is probably going to, in essence, recruit over you in some sort of way, which there's nothing wrong with competition. You have to have competition. But how much, I wonder, is that going to play into guys that come to a school but leave because every year they're getting recruited over every single year?
Yeah, look, I get frustrated sometimes because I see kids who they come in as freshmen, they don't play. You would never have expected them to play based on the depth chart when they signed, and then they transfer because they didn't play. It's like, well, you knew, you should have known this was coming. But I think at the same time, one that's like investment of time in recruiting, right? Like if you're a head coach, you're going to spend 6 to 8 months recruiting a high school kid. You're going to spend 2 to 3 weeks recruiting a transfer. If you spend 6 to 8 months recruiting a kid who's never going to play his freshman year and then transfer out, you really waste a lot of time. And I think that means that you need to really figure out like what's inside these kids, right? Like if you can recruit a kid like Caleb Banks, who's like, I don't care. Like I want to be in Indiana. I am willing to work. If no matter how long it takes for me to get in the rotation, I'm confident I will get there and I will beat whoever you bring in front of me. And I'm not afraid of competition. Those are the kids you need, right? But if you're going to keep investing all this time in getting like X fringe top 100 recruit, and then all of a sudden X fringe top 100 recruit is just transferring every spring because he didn't play, because why would he play? You recruited him to be the 11th man as a freshman. Then you're just like you have to start thinking like, how are we using our resources and our time in recruiting?